We are live.
All right, Marcus, welcome to the show. We start every single episode with your top 3 actionable takeaways. So let's get your 3.
Awesome, man. Let's dive right into it. So the first one is my 70% voicemail callback framework. Now, most people hate to leave a voicemail because the truth is most don't get a response back. But the truth is, with a 5 to 10% connect rate, that's 95% of people you don't talk to. So if you can get a fraction to call you back, you're already the head of the game. So the way you do it that gets you a really high callback rate is very, very simple. So on a cold voicemail early in the sequence, what you want to do is leverage curiosity and authority to engage a callback. So hear how that sounds. It sounds like this. Hey, Nick, it's Marcus. I'm calling in reference to Lemlist. Please give me a call back at 541-123-4567. Again, 541-123-4567. Thank you. Now note there the non-salesy tonality and the attitude, as that is what makes it work. And when I'm inserting the name of Lemlist there, I'm just inserting a relevant current customer name of similar size. This will make them curious and create some FOMO when they get this 12-second voice and making them want to call you back, hopefully as soon as possible.
Beautiful. What's number 2, Marcus?
Cool. So number 2 is very simple. It's the sliding scale for eliminating objections proactively. Now, before presenting price, you want to eliminate all the conscious and unconscious objections for all buying influences. Any objections you don't handle up front can potentially surprise you on the back end, which is never a fun thing. So before you share the price, you just want to insert one really, really simple question, which sounds like this. Pricing aside, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being, I hate this, never want to see you again, and 10 being, yes, is exactly what I need or what we need, where do you fall exactly? So at that point, they can give you a number. Let's just say they say 7. Then you ask the next question, which sounds like, well, what's 7 mean for you exactly? And then, of course, if necessary, what do you think is potentially holding you back from a 9 or 10? Now, what happens is this will logically flesh out other objections that can help you redirect your sales process so then you can actually eliminate all the objections before you actually get to the close.
Beautiful. Round us out, Marcus. What's number 3?
Awesome. So a third one, very simple. It's utilizing damaging admissions to increase trust and certainty with your prospect. Now, the truth is, as a salesperson, we're all salespeople here, we love to talk about how awesome our product and solution is. Now, as part of your demo or presentation, you want to include a damaging admission to admit any faults, flaws, or issues up front. So, for example, after you've shared some incredible features and benefits with them, you add something like this in. Full transparency, Nick, our software integrates perfectly with Salesforce. But if you change to a different CRM, our software won't work as smoothly.
Alrighty, so let's go back to your voicemails and then make our way into discovery. So what you're doing is you're saying, hey, let's say I'm calling Coca-Cola. I might say like, hey, I'm calling in regards to Pepsi or Doritos even, right? It might not even be a competitor. And you're saying nothing about what you do, who you are, the company that you're at, all that jazz. What are the kinds of calls back that you get after this?
It's awesome. So this is why it's key to do this early on in the sequence, right? So when they call you back, there's a couple different ways it can go. Either number 1, they're confused. They call you up. They're like, "Hey, so you gave me a call. It's Bob over at Pepsi. Like, what's going on?" And they're actually a little bit confused, which is actually good because that means the resistance is down. So now you're able to go into your typical opener, right? Which is very, very powerful. Or number 2, sometime what you'll see, depending on the size of the business, they may think it's a potential opportunity for a partnership or a customer for them, and they're pretty excited. So let's just say, for example, they call you, and you're probably busy when they call anyway. You're probably on the phone, you're doing something, or you're in meetings. They might leave a voicemail for you. It's amazing how often when they call you back and they get your voicemail, they'll say, hey, hey, Nick, it's Bob over at Pepsi. Like, I'm sorry I missed your call, but I'm never really in my office, so here's my cell number. Here's my direct line. Or I'm available at this time later today if you're able to talk. So what happens is they're more open to talk, which is actually just absolutely awesome. And sometimes you might play even a little bit of phone tag, so you kind of go back and forth. And now all of a sudden, even your second voicemail to them, it's like, hey, it's Marcus again. sorry for the phone tag. Now you have this like really odd rapport built with someone you never talked to before. So when you get on there, you have immediate levity to break the ice. And now you can actually have a real conversation about what they're doing and book a deeper discovery from there. That's what happens over time. And then you'll get a small percentage of them where they don't call you back, right? They don't call you back, right? So then when you call them again a few days later and you leave a very similar voicemail, now they have 2 voicemails, and they're like, wow, this is strange. If they have it on their phone, it's transcribed. Like, this is really strange. I wonder what's going on. Am I missing something? Which, again, causes them to want to respond back to you, which is wildly powerful because then obviously when they call you back, then you can book that meeting once you talk to them.
So Marcus, let's talk about that first response or that first callback. They call you back, and they're like, hey, you called me about Pepsi, right? You said go back to your original opener. What does that sound like?
Awesome. So I like really simple and direct openers, right? So let's just say they call me back and they say, oh, yeah, it's Bob with Pepsi. You called me. I say, oh, awesome. Notice the tonality. Oh, it's awesome. Hey, Bob, thanks so much for calling me. Notice here a couple things. The tonality shifted. So it's really important to understand that there's a differentiation. Now the tonality is completely shifted. Oh, Bob, thank you so much for calling me. Right? Hey, the reason I actually called is I'm actually with whatever company you're with, okay? And I called in reference to whatever reference you dropped. And the reason I actually called because we're actually working with them with whatever solution, whatever offering you have. And I thought potentially you might be a really good fit as well for this solution as well. But I know I initially called you out of the blue and you called me out of the blue, but do you have some time to chat about it right now for 5 or 10 minutes? And at that point, they have a decision to make. And usually their resistance is down, so they're like, sure. Or they say, oh, I'm actually kind of busy right now, but maybe in a couple of weeks. Great. At that point, now you can just pull your calendar up and you book them into your calendar. And because, again, the resistance is down, they're still drastically more open to that conversation as long as your tonality is spot on and you're casual with your approach.
Well, what you're doing here is really smart because one of the things that we know about selling is sometimes you got to demonstrate a little bit of social proof. And sometimes when I'm emailing Armand's company, I might mention in that email, hey, we work with these 2 people who are really similar to you. And that's what your voicemail is doing. You're literally just saying, hey, I'm calling in reference to X. And X is that piece of social proof. And so, again, to Armand's similar example to yours, if I called Visa and I say, hey, I'm calling about American Express, they're like, oh, what the heck is this? And what you did is really smart because normally I'm like, they call me back and I'm like, oh yeah, this was a sales call. And then their guard goes up instantly. And instead what you're doing is you're actually just flipping it. You're saying you're starting with social proof and then going into your value prop or problem prop. As opposed to what most people do, which is they start with their value prop and problem prop and then they go into the social proof. My question for you is, one of the things that we've learned from other guests is it's good to attack multiple channels, right? Leave a voicemail, send a LinkedIn message, send an email. Are there other associated prospecting activities with this voicemail script that are similar, or is it just the voicemail? So
I have found it works most effectively with just voicemail because this is why it works best early in the sequence. Because say, for example, if your first touch point is a call, you leave a voicemail. And then if you go and start, sending them messages on, email, LinkedIn, et cetera, over the next several days, now there's too much familiarity at that point. Now you really lose the whole reason why it works so well. So that's why I always recommend you start off with calls first. And personally, I prefer the calls first as the touch points, leaving the voicemail. Because again, if I email them, I can't handle objection that I don't hear. On the phone, when I get that, if I get an objection when they call me back, that's great because now I can really feel them out and really position myself for hopefully a meeting with them. If not, set up for a future state, future situation where maybe we meet in a couple of months or something. But then we have some more familiarity up front. So that's why typically the deeper you are in your sequence, it's not as effective. So like, let's say it's like 3 weeks in, you're like, maybe you have a 15-point point sequence. At that point, you do a voicemail at the very end. It may not work as well as you like because they already know you. They're like, okay, this guy's already called. I've already seen his emails. I've seen his messages. He's commenting on my LinkedIn. It's just not as effective at that point.
So can we roll right into the objection handling side of things where you get that call back and you tell them, yeah, the reason I was calling you is because we're working with Visa and here's what we did for them. What are some of the common objections that you'll get when they call you back and then you give your pitch that you then handle? and how?
Yeah. So, I mean, especially if it's a big opportunity, a lot of times, like they probably have someone in place, all right, whatever vendor. So it's really usually quite common. So they say, oh, you know what? Sometimes if you have like someone who's kind of sales savvy, they'll be like, dang, that was good. Okay, you got me to call you back. They kind of laugh a little bit, like, yeah. But you're funny, Marcus. But we're actually totally good, man. We already have this vendor. We've used him for a number of years. I say, cool, that's fantastic. That makes a lot of sense because you are Visa, you are Pepsi, you are whomever. So if you don't mind me asking, who are you guys currently using? That's it. So I opened up a little bit of the conversation. Oh, you've been using company X for whatever I'm selling. Oh, that's great. I've heard amazing things about them. I have nothing but great things to say about them. And then depending on the angle I want to go, it might be like, hey, so we actually have a few different solutions that can really complement really nicely if you're open to learning a little bit more. So again, I know this is a little bit out of the blue again, so do you want to keep this conversation going right now? Or we can set up a deeper conversation, like 15, 20 minutes, say next week at Monday at 1 p.m. So again, I'm just addressing it. I'm not making it a big deal. Again, we're just having a conversation about it. Now works really well, especially if they feel like they've been very loyal to their vendor for a very long time.
Marcus, can you talk a little bit about the intentionality around tone on the cold calls? Like, a lot of times you're just like, oh yeah, of course, like I know those guys. Or when you get a call back, you're like, oh hey, awesome, it's good to hear from you again. Like, what are some of the deadly sins that you hear folks do around tone, and how can we do it a little bit better on the phones?
Such a good question. So I think one of the things, especially if you're like a BDR or SDR, is your tonality does not align to the level of status of the person you're calling. So when you call someone who is a C-suite, a high-level decision maker, and you sound like this is the first time you made a cold call, they're not going to want to talk to you. Like it's such a simple little thing where that's where the words you say really don't matter as much as how you actually say it. So if you notice here, even with these role plays we're doing, it's coming off like, hey, I know this person, I'm of equal status, and I'm very comfortable. It's as if I've done it thousands of times. Now, personally, I have, but even if you are relatively new, it's making sure that even when you practice it, when your tonality comes through, it sounds like you've done it 1,000 times. And then when you get the objections, which is going to happen regardless, do you sound like it's the first time you ever heard it? It's like, okay, that makes sense that you have a vendor. Yeah, for sure. Versus, yeah, it makes sense. Of course you have a vendor. Like, you are Visa. Of course you have a vendor in place. You're not a startup. You've been around for literally decades. So understand the tonality piece of having that conviction and confidence. And whatever they throw at you, it really needs to sound like you've heard it thousands of times. And it's not a big deal. If it sounds like a big deal, they feel like you have no experience and that you're not actually going to be relevant in helping them out in solving whatever issue you claim you could solve for them.
So Marcus, you talked about role plays, and one of the things we've story told about in the past is I would walk around the streets of San Francisco and I would just imagine someone with my headsets on, not talking to anyone. I would imagine someone said, I'm not interested. And I would practice the laugh. I would practice being like, so I guess you would have cold called me if you were interested. And I would practice these things a million times so that when it came to me on a cold call, I was ready for it. And I had heard it a million times from myself. Now, I looked a little bit weird, but maybe you have some other ways where you might not look as weird. But what are other ways that I can go about practicing that confidence and getting better, getting more reps in on the phone before I actually get into live action?
Yeah, great question. So, repetition is a father of mastery. I mean, that's just what happens. I love you sharing that specifically about you walking to San Francisco. Like, back when I was a field rep, I would do the same thing in my car, driving my 40-minute commute. I was role playing out loud like the worst prospects. I'm imagining they're cursing me out, and I'm like, I've heard that a million times, and I keep going. For those who you're probably working at home right now, it's actually building in time for the repetition. So no different than sports and anything else. The top athletes aren't the ones who only really catch the ball on the field. They are off the field in the gym. They're practicing nonstop to really make sure when that ball is thrown to them, when that person answers the phone, they're ready to go. So it's taking the time to build it in, even if it's 5 minutes a day, it's still better than not doing it. But on top of that, what I would really recommend is you need to put yourself into state, right? So even you recording on your phone with a voice memo, you going through and imagining multiple objections, role playing the worst scenario, and record it. And then listen back to yourself over and over and over so you feel really good and you build your own internal confidence. Because as we all know, sales is a confidence game. It's a bank account. We either deposit in or we do withdrawals. And you need constant with deposits into that confidence bank to feel really good. One of the easiest ways to control that is simply making sure you do the repetitions. And the thing is, most sales managers aren't going to make you do it. So you have to hold yourself accountable to it, because ultimately that's what's going to make you good. When you take ownership in the game, that's how you actually really improve, and you actually build confidence in your scripting, in what you say, in every single little thing. So for example, you've learned some scripting so far on this podcast as we're listening. It's not cool, that sounds good, I'm going to try out my first cold call. It's, I'm going to write this down, and now I'm going to go and practice it 15 times, and now I'm going to go do it. And then when you sound really good and your conviction's there, that's how you get calls back. That's how when you start doing it, you'll probably get maybe 10% call back, then 20%, then 30%. And the more you do it, the easier it gets, and it flows without you thinking.
Well, the way that this won't work is if you put 2 hours on your calendar every day for the next month to say, I'm only going to practice. Because what's going to happen is you'll do it the first 2 days, and then you're like, ugh, I've got a lot of work to do, and you end up losing steam. It's just like everybody's New Year's resolution. If you try to over-index towards the behavior you want, like, you're going to burn yourself out. And so the best way to do this is to set a minimum of effective dose. Put literally 5 minutes on your calendar. All you're going to do is 5 minutes, and constrain the amount of time that you can spend. A couple other things that you can do related to this practice is maybe you're somebody who doesn't have a friend that you can practice with. I'm not looking at you, Armand. What you could do is record a voice note on your phone and send it to a friend who might live out of state or a family member and say, does this even sound remotely right? I know when I was first starting in sales, like I was sending Armand stuff all the time and like, is this voicemail script good? How about this cold call opener? So that he could hear the tone also. The other thing to note is find somebody and explain how your solution actually works to them. I will never forget my first ever sales job. I was sitting in the hot tub with my girlfriend, and she was like, so what do you guys actually do? And I explained it to her, and like midway through, my face started getting really red. So I was like, it was not how I actually communicated. And she looked at me, and she was like, what the fuck are you talking about? And so, like, you've got to explain stuff the way that you would to a friend. And speaking of how we would explain stuff as we would to a friend, let's talk about, we've overcome the objection, somebody called us back, and we've shown up on the discovery call. There's an opportunity in the discovery call sometimes to explain our stuff. So you boot up the Zoom, Armand joins, he's only 3 minutes late, he's your customer, you're there with your smiling face, Marcus. How do you start that call?
Sure. So I think the rookie mistake is you start talking about the weather, okay? Or you start like, go into some long spiel. You try to go into like immediate upfront agreement or something like that. Like, not to say those things can't work. I'm just saying people are tired of that, right? And people want to know they're talking to a real human being, right? So, Armand shows up late. It is what it is, right? So I like to just start off like my camera's on, right? And sometimes they don't have the camera on or off. You don't really know. Maybe they do, they don't. I don't really care. But I'll have mine on, and I'll pop on. But, hey, Armand, what's going on, man? I want to make sure my camera's on so I'm a real dude in Oregon, not some rando in a cave somewhere. Break that, pause. Let them kind of like, cool. All right, cool. So I'm immediately showing I'm of equal status, a peer that they can know, like, and trust me. We're just like, we should be able to have a great conversation. And then before I dive into stuff, I'm like, hey, so, day going good so far? That's it. Real simple. I don't want to spend 15 minutes talking about like a bunch of baloney, because I need to make sure like I have his attention right now. I finally got the meeting. What are we going to talk about next? So they say, oh, yeah, so what going good? I say, cool. At that point, I have to actually insert a little personal thing in there just to humanize the situation, right? So that might sound something like, oh, great, cool. I just got done picking up my kid from school. Yeah, awesome. So I'm excited to chat with you. Something that's a little bit personal message. Again, it humanizes the situation, right? I forgot to mention as well, the backdrop to the videos is key too, because if you're on Zoom, what they see around you may cause them to trigger certain things as well. It can either add trust or remove trust. So again, from there, they might be like, yours is okay, Nick. I'm just saying. But in general, when they see it, they're like, oh, cool. Like, you got this cool green light, kind of like 30 MPC. All right, that's a nice flow right there. All right, if you're watching the video. So they say, oh, cool, whatever. You talk for a second and say, cool, awesome. So I say, obviously, hey, listen, obviously, you're very busy, so let's just dive right in. Is that cool? Awesome, cool. And then I'll just do like a little bit of a recap based on what we discussed. Hey, so when we chatted a couple days ago, when I called you out of the blue, what I mentioned was I'm actually already working with Pepsi, helping them with whatever solution and achieving desired objectives. So my goal today is just to do a little bit of deep dive into your situation, and then from there we can kind of plan next steps to see what makes the most sense to potentially work together. Is that cool? Awesome, great. Basic, very casual, very simple, not a big deal, right?
I find that oftentimes we get so caught up in the tactics, but what people don't realize is, Marcus, you and I get onto a Zoom, and in 30 seconds, I'm going to put you somewhere on the ladder in terms of where I see you presenting yourself. Mm-hmm. And a lot of folks, they come on board and they're either super awkwardly or nervously trying to build rapport, or they come in overstructured with the upfront contract, what have you. And what I find is that the sooner you can figure out like what you actually want to say, and just be comfortable saying what's actually on your mind in front of an executive, the sooner they start to respect that level of genuity for you. But way too many folks, you can tell they've read too many sales books and they over-manufacture the beginning of the call instead of being comfortable calling out an executive on their shit every once in a while. And that's how they rub elbows with each other. And if you can level there, that's how you get that level of respect.
100%. I mean, they have to, again, they have to feel like you're at least someone of value. They're sizing you up once you get on the call. They're like, is this worth my time? And if they don't think it's worth the time, they'll be like, well, anyways, Marcos, we're good. We gotta wrap this baby up. I gotta go. It's been 2 minutes. Like, I'm sorry, I must have double booked. So you don't want that. You need to establish it as fast as possible, because let's just say, for example, it's a big company like, say, it's Pepsi or Coca-Cola you're calling into. If you're calling like the executive vice president, they may not be the person that drives the whole deal, but you need an executive sponsorship to move the rest of the deal forward. So, and they're not going to pass you to all their team, their whole team, if they do not trust you. They'll cut you off, and you're stuck in water. You're dead in the water.
So, Marcus, Nick, I think you were asking a question.
You can go. Go ahead.
So, Marcus, we've talked about the tone and the way that you present yourself, but if I'm in the room with the C-suite and I'm asking discovery questions, what are above-the-line topics or above-the-line questions that I can be asking instead of getting caught in the weeds?
Sure, for sure. Yeah. So typically, when you're talking to the C-suite at that high level of a big organization, like most of the time they may not even know what software they're using. They may not know the ins and outs. They don't know how many users. They don't know the specifications that you may need to know. All they really care about is like, hey, how will you help them drive their overall objectives? Okay. Now, so for example, if you want to be very simple, direct, you can just literally go out and just you start with their overall initiatives. Hey, so you establish, you want to establish you've done your homework and your research in advance very quickly with them. So that might be as simple as, hey, so taking a look at your guys' most recent earnings transcript from 2021, and also the call transcript. I noticed you guys said the 3 big priorities for this upcoming fiscal year is going to be major growth initiatives, and you're going to do them by doing X. And number 2, it's going to be also improving safety as a company culture, because you had X number of incidents that really impacted your overall turnover as a company. Whatever, I'm making something up. So for you, am I correct in just make sure I read that properly? Yes, you are. Cool. Can you tell me a little more about specifically why you chose the specific objectives? So now we're starting to go into overall key objectives. And some people, like, if you're a rookie salesperson, you're thinking, well, that's not going to help me sell my software. Actually, it does. Because ultimately, whenever you're selling whatever product or solution, it's going to help them achieve certain motives, and that's going to ultimately drive core objectives that the executive wants. So we can tie it all together by uncovering what they want at the highest level. It helps drive down everything else. So you start off understanding their core objectives, and then you go a little bit deeper, and then from there you'll start seeing that they realize that you actually know what you're talking about, and that's wildly powerful again, because now you can utilize that, because whatever key initiatives they have will trickle down to their teams, and everything is aligned together so you actually can move the deal forward. Otherwise, your solution becomes a nice to have and not a must have.
I want to point out a piece of distinction in what you were doing there. What you did not do was show up to that meeting and say, tell me about your priorities or what's important to you and your business this year. Instead, what you did is you said, here is what I found doing my research. Is that right? And newsflash, you won't always be right. You might have found like an outdated article or that person's specific team doesn't touch those things. But by very virtue of you having done some research and said, here's what I found when I was doing research, you've earned credit in the other person's book. You are always better off saying, here's what I found, here's my hunch, here's my thesis, than saying, I don't know, you tell me. Are there other questions that you're going to ask? So now you get into a conversation, right? And they're talking about the growth initiatives and the different lines of business they're trying to grow. Like, are there other questions or question techniques that you'll use to try to further that discovery call closer to you ultimately winning their business?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's going to be, obviously, depending on what you're selling, you may start kind of rabbit holing down different areas. So I think what's important to understand that you probably want to have some key, simple go-to frameworks, especially if you're kind of new to even just kind of discovery, that you can kind of pull out and utilize for majority of situations if you get stuck. Because what you don't want to happen is you don't want to just get that lull and you're like, let me just start pitching this exec now on my solution. Let me start trying to do a mini demo. Let me pull a slide deck out. Don't do any of those things. So the truth is that when you look at discovery, I picture it's just like an onion. And you ask the first couple layers of the question, you peel the first couple layers. But you want to keep diving deep as possible. And for sure, you can use like, how, what, and why questions. But sometimes even in the moment, it's not as appropriate. It doesn't make as much sense. So a couple really simple go-to easy phrases you can literally use right now. Whatever they say, you can just say, great. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And just stop talking. And just wait. Let the silence fill the call so they can tell you more. Another really simple one is, can you elaborate a little bit more about that? Again, you can use this for like a majority of situations now because those are really simple, easy ones, because obviously you can go into the how and the what, but you incorporate those tell me a little bit more. Can you elaborate about that? Now, they're going to start diving deep into the root of the onion, and that's actually where the magic usually lies of what they truly desire. And if you can start diving into some of the psychographics of some of their decisions, it's amazing how much faster you can move a deal forward. So what I mean by that specifically, just to give you an example so it actually makes sense for Cinja's theory. When you start diving into maybe the core objective, like the initiatives I mentioned earlier, let's just say it is growth we had mentioned, okay? And we start diving into really why it's important to them because it seems obvious, but you start diving deeply how it actually impacts that specific exec. And they say something like, well, the truth is because now they trust you as a peer. The truth is this is my first time as a CEO. I've been CFO, I've been CTO. I've never been a CEO before of a company. I really want to get recognized in the Wall Street Journal this coming year. So now you suddenly realize this from a psychographic perspective, you are digging into their status level. And when you can tap that deep because they trust you and respect you, and it may not be on the first call always, but sometimes a little bit later on, now you can leverage that to actually move the deal forward. And that's really when you become powerful discovery. Because again, deals are made and broken within discovery.
Well, Marcus, a lot of people are afraid to ask why questions because they think they're very antagonistic. Why'd you do that? Why are you doing this? What have you? But you're essentially asking a why question or a TED question, a layering question. And people hear, oh yeah, let's say I ask them about their compensation priorities because PAVE is a compensation company. Someone might say, hey, I'm really focused on making sure employees understand their total compensation. And people will take that at face value. But if you ask why and say, like, most people don't wake up and think my employees don't understand their total compensation, why is that the priority you picked? You'll almost always get a story. as to this employee left the company, or I've had 10 people leave, or I had these many people complain, what have you, and that's how it ended up on my priority list. Never take it at face value. Right. Always try to get to the root cause of why that is the face value priority in the first place.
Absolutely. The root cause drives everything else. And sometimes they may not know it off the top of their head, but only when you ask questions like the why question. Then obviously you're right. If you don't do it properly, it comes off as you're just coming at them hard, antagonistic. But if you read them and if you sense them get a little defensive, then you can insert other trust-based language that says, well, Armand, if you don't mind me asking, and you notice here, my tone is softened. I'm lowering my voice a little bit. I'm adding some pauses in here. I'm saying, well, if you don't mind me asking, how come this is such a big priority for you? Then from there, usually like, oh, wow, here's why. So that's why it's important to understand is what you say is important, but how you say it, again, back to tonality, can really help you get the truth. Because ultimately, as a salesperson, all you want is the truth. When you have the truth and you have clarity, this helps you know, number one, is this worth my time? Can I truly help them? If I can, great. How can I help them?
Beautiful. I don't know if we have a ton of to cut here, Armand. Is there any other topic you want to get into? You're muted.
I said I was thinking. This has been fun. It was very different for our last episode too, but I like this one a lot. Marcus, what do you think?
Is there any other content that you wanted to share, say? Any other frameworks you think are good? This is going to be a great episode regardless.
This is like a lot of stuff for them to go and do. Because we definitely rabbit hole some things. I'm like, shit, man. If they walk away doing at least one of these things, we'll get some better results.
Yeah. Well, we'll roll into the final question. Actually, before we roll into the final question, Armand, one of the things that you said that I've never used before was you said most people don't wake up and X, and then you explain the problem that the other person was trying to solve. I love that question for the reason of it forces them to go back to when that state changed for them. Because what you're implying with that question is most people are not in the state of pain to the level that you are right now. And you're asking them to then tell you the story of when they transitioned into that state. And we know when people tell us stories, that gets them to the emotional reasons that help us end up selling. So anyways, most people don't wake up and say, oh, I'm going to listen to a 45-minute episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club, and we cannot do that to them. So we got to roll into the final question. And the final question is this, Marcus. We have talked about a lot of wonderful things that salespeople should be doing, but I want to flip that on its head and ask you the inverse. So the final question is, what is one bad habit that you see a lot of salespeople exhibiting that they need to break because it's hurting them more than it helps?
Sure. Well, I'll say the simple one is they live day by day. And what I mean by that is they're not taking the time to properly prepare and look ahead in advance what their whole week should look like, what their whole month, what their whole quarter should look like. So I'll give you a really specific example. Let's just say, for example, you're thinking, hey, for my quota for the quarter, I need to sell, let's call it $250,000. And then they put in their funnel, in their pipeline, they're like, oh, I feel pretty good. I have about $300,000 in pipeline. I'm feeling pretty good. You are still living day to day at that point, because the truth is you very rarely will close 100% of your funnel. That's just I've never done that. Maybe you've done it if you're lucky. Maybe you're probably better than me if that's the case, but I've never done it personally. So when you are looking ahead and you're really thinking about how to not live day to day, but live actually in the future, you're looking at your pipeline now. Let's just say, for example, you want to close $300,000. You know you have a 25% closing ratio. Well, now you can take that pipeline, multiply it 4. I now need a $1.2 million in pipeline that's active to close at least $300,000. So when you start thinking this way, this now causes you to change behaviors and habits to not live day to day, but now how can I structure my days, my weeks, my months to ensure I'm going to not just hit my number, but far exceed it. And with a little bit of luck, of course, from the sales gods, if you will, I'll do way beyond it as a result.
Beautiful. Marcus, anything you want to promote before we jump off here?
Cool, man. So super simple. First off, thank you so much for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure as usual. If you're not following me on LinkedIn, make sure to follow me on LinkedIn. Easiest way to access all my free trainings, etc., is just head over to my LinkedIn page, go to the feature section. I got free trainings inside there to help you earn additional 50, 100K more in commissions and bonuses.
Beautiful. Marcus, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody, stick around for a 60-second recap coming up soon.